AITA, for calling off my engagement after my fiancée compared me to her ex during our wedding tasting. Imagine meticulously planning the most important day of your life, only to uncover a hidden agenda woven into every detail. What would you do if you realized the person you were about to marry was using your insecurities as a tool, all to conceal a shocking family secret? I'm Ethan, 34, and my fiancée Isabella is 32. We'd been together for years and engaged long enough that our wedding preparations had lost their sparkle. It felt less like an exciting journey towards matrimony and more like managing a second, highly demanding household budget. For a few months, I was perfectly fine with that. Isabella meticulously tracked cake flavors in her phone, while I kept tabs on payment deadlines. She'd stress over whether the invitations looked too formal. I'd worry if we were paying thousands extra for details neither of us would remember a year later. We often joked that if our biggest argument was about ivory versus white tablecloths, we were doing pretty well. We had always agreed we wanted a memorable wedding, not a financial black hole. We had savings, certainly enough for something beautiful, but I didn't want to deplete our funds just because we could, especially since we'd both spent years talking about starting married life without immediately feeling financially strained. Isabella used to tell me that was one of the qualities she loved most about me. "You make everything feel less chaotic," she'd once said. "That matters because my family can be the opposite." Her mother, Margaret, had strong opinions on nearly everything. Her father, Robert, was generally quieter, but he had a way of subtly supporting Margaret by remaining silent until the very end, then adding a single sentence that left no doubt about his allegiance. Isabella's younger brother, Leo, 29, was frequently present during wedding discussions, but rarely contributed anything substantial. He'd gone through a broken engagement some time ago. No one ever spoke about it in detail. The official story was that it had been painful and costly, and the family preferred not to revisit old wounds. Then there was Marcus. Marcus was Isabella's ex-boyfriend. I'd never met him, and frankly, I never had an issue with him. From what I understood, they'd dated years before Isabella and I became serious, and their relationship ended because they simply wanted different things. But Isabella's family remembered him as a kind of symbol. Marcus was the name they'd always bring up when they wanted to talk about social standing without actually using the word. Marcus had leased a fancier car. Marcus had taken Isabella to upscale restaurants. Marcus knew how to make an impression. Marcus had once picked up the tab for a family dinner before Robert could even reach for his wallet. Margaret still recounted that story as if he'd occurred a peace treaty. For a long time, I just ignored it. Isabella would occasionally roll her eyes and comment, "My mom just loves shiny things." And because Isabella and I were so solid, I didn't let it bother me. Then the wedding planning began. That's when Marcus stopped being a harmless name from the past and transformed into a yardstick. It started with subtle comments. Understated was Margaret's polite way of saying cheap. A week later, she told Isabella that people remembered how a family honored its daughter. I remarked that the wedding was for us, not for people to scrutinize afterward. Margaret simply smiled and replied, "Of course, but people notice things whether we like it or not." Then came the first wave of upgrades, a better bar package, then upgraded linens, a larger floral allotment, additional lighting, and an expanded menu that somehow turned a dinner we already liked into something requiring several $1,000s more. Each individual increase, presented alone, sounded manageable, but together, they were becoming ridiculous. I started pushing back. That's when the tone shifted dramatically. Margaret informed me, "A wedding is the first public demonstration of how a man provides." I remember looking at Isabella, expecting her to intervene. She did, but not in the way I anticipated. "Mom means people will read into it," she said. "People can read whatever they want," I retorted. "We already agreed on the budget." Margaret offered a small, knowing smile. "Budgets aren't sacred," I said. "Trust is." That ended the conversation for the night, at least. But the pressure didn't subside. Isabella began changing how she spoke about our wedding fund. It used to be our budget. Then it became what we still have available. A few weeks later, it was what we can access. I noticed the shift, but at the time, I thought I was being overly sensitive. We had set up a separate account for wedding expenses, and I was the primary payer on the venue contract since I'd handled the deposit. Isabella had access to a card used for approved vendor expenses. We both contributed, but I had put in a larger share because we'd agreed to split things based on what made sense for us. not a strict 50-50. Isabella used to call the card our magic card because for months, it seemed to make deposits disappear without us feeling the pinch in our normal checking accounts. That joke stopped being funny later. Around the same time, Leo started acting strangely whenever the venue came up. The first time, I barely noticed. We were having dinner with Isabella's family, and I mentioned the venue had revised the upgrade quote again. Leo got up almost immediately, claiming he needed to take a call, though he had no phone in his hand. The next time, I asked Margaret why one of the package increases seemed disproportionately larger than the actual list of upgrades. Leo stared intently at his plate. Robert changed the subject to parking. Isabella simply said the venue had complicated pricing. I accepted that for about another week. Then Margaret said something at a planning lunch that stuck with me. Arguing for the larger package, she said, after the wedding, nobody will remember which line item paid for what. I initially thought she meant flowers, chairs, food, all the interchangeable costs that blend into a wedding bill. Later, I realized she had been telling me a much more direct truth than I understood. The tasting took place on a Saturday evening. We were at the venue, menu cards before us, small sample plates arriving every few minutes, and slices of 3 different cakes sitting between us like we were judging some low-stakes competition. Isabella was beside me. Margaret and Robert were across. Leo was also there, because Margaret had insisted family input mattered. Ms. Davies, the venue's account manager, was moving between our table and another couple's tasting. She had already told us we didn't need to finalize the upgrade package that night. That should have ended the discussion. It didn't. Margaret brought up the larger package again. We're sticking with the original version, Isabella, I stated. Isabella stiffened beside me. We have room, she said. We have money, I replied. That's not the same thing. Margaret interjected, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child. Nobody is asking you to be reckless. Ethan. Good, I responded, because I'm not going to be. Then Isabella picked up her phone. At first, I thought she was checking a message. Instead, she turned the screen towards the table. It was a social media post from Marcus. I recognized the name because I'd seen it before. He was standing in front of a large new house, holding what looked like a set of keys. The caption was about finally closing. Isabella looked straight at me. That's what real security looks like, she said. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Margaret looked pleased. Robert looked down. Leo suddenly became very interested in his glass. I asked Isabella, what exactly are you saying? She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. I'm saying some people understand that money is there to build a life, not just sit behind a number because spending makes them nervous. I could feel heat rising up my neck. Not because Marcus had a house, good for him. Not because Isabella had once dated him. I'd known that for years. What truly stung was that she had taken something private and old, something she knew her family used to needle me, and placed it in the middle of our wedding tasting like a weapon. Margaret added, nobody is asking you to be Marcus. We are asking you to think bigger. I looked at Isabella. She didn't back down. That was the moment I stopped treating the problem like normal wedding stress. I smiled, but only because I knew anything I said right then would become the new focus of the story, eclipsing what Isabella had just done. I finished the tasting. I thanked Ms. Davies. I didn't argue in front of the staff. On the way out, Isabella asked why I was being so quiet. I heard you, I said. She replied, then maybe think about what I said. So, I did. In the parking lot while Isabella rode home with her parents because they wanted to discuss flowers further, I sat in my car and called the bank. I didn't empty our account. I didn't touch Isabella's contribution. I moved my portion of the money out of the account that had open card access, froze the old wedding card, and requested a replacement card, linked only to the amount I was still willing to commit to the wedding budget we had originally agreed on. No more upgrades, no surprise charges, no access to the extra money I had set aside for our future. I also changed the card controls, so charges over a set amount required direct approval. Then I went home. Isabella got back later than I did. She was still fuming, telling me I had embarrassed her in front of her family by refusing to discuss the package like an adult. I said, I'm not discussing money with you while your ex is sitting at the table on your phone. She rolled her eyes. He wasn't sitting at the table. You know what I mean? You're proving my point, I asked. What point is that? That you're threatened by him? That hurt more than I expected. I told her I was going to sleep in the guest room because I didn't trust myself to have a useful conversation that night. Before I did, I placed a new plain bank card on her dresser. No note, no dramatic message. She thought it was a replacement. Technically, It was. The next morning, she learned what had changed when she tried to use it for a venue upgrade. The transaction didn't go through. She came into the kitchen holding the card. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I limited wedding spending to the budget we agreed on." Her face changed. "So now I have to ask permission like a child?" "No," I clarified. "We both have to stick to the budget like adults." "You moved money without telling me," she accused. "My money. Our wedding money," she retorted. "The amount you contributed is still there. The amount I contributed beyond the original budget is no longer available for upgrades." She stared at me. "You realize how controlling that sounds?" I nodded. "I realize how bad it looks. I also realize you used your ex in front of your family to pressure me into spending more." "That was one comment," she insisted. "It was one public comment after months of pressure." She threw the card onto the counter. "You made me look like I was stealing from you." "I didn't say you were stealing from me," I corrected. "You did this instead." Then she left and called Margaret. Within an hour, my phone rang. Margaret didn't bother with small talk. She declared, "You have humiliated my daughter." I said, "Isabella and I will deal with our finances between us. You can't give a woman access to a wedding account and then yank it away because your ego was bruised," she snapped. "I limited my money to the budget Isabella and I already agreed on," I explained. "She is about to be your wife." Margaret continued, "Then we should be able to agree on a budget without Marcus's social media being used as leverage." Margaret went silent for a moment. Then she said, "A man who wants to marry my daughter should not be this afraid of commitment." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "This is not about commitment. You are turning family into accounting," I said. "A wedding budget is accounting." She hung up. Robert called that afternoon. His tone was calmer, which somehow made it more irritating. He told me I was almost family, and that money between people building a life together shouldn't be treated like separate piles. I asked if that meant Isabella's money was now available to me without asking. He said that wasn't the point. I told him it was exactly the point. He said, "This could have stayed private." I said, "It was private until your daughter put her ex's house in the middle of our tasting." That night, Isabella and I barely spoke. The next morning, I received an email from the venue confirming our upcoming payment schedule. I almost ignored it. Then I saw a line I didn't recognize. "Prior family account adjustment." Under that was another line. "Package consolidation." Together, they were too significant to be meaningless. I opened the earlier statements I had saved. Those exact words had not appeared at the beginning of planning. They showed up after Margaret started pushing hard for the upgraded package. I asked Isabella about it that evening. She was standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her notes app. "What is prior family account adjustment?" I asked. She didn't look at me right away. "It's probably how the venue groups things." "What things?" "I don't know, Ethan. Family account, wedding account. Their wording is weird. Have you asked them?" "No," I said. I watched her for a second. She looked annoyed, not confused. "It's a pretty large adjustment," I pressed. She put her phone down harder than necessary. "You are looking for a problem because your ego got bruised." "I'm looking at an invoice." "You know what I mean," she insisted. I did. She wanted every concern I raised to be proof that I was insecure about Marcus. That was convenient for her, because then she didn't have to answer the question. I didn't argue. The next morning, I called the venue. Ms. Davies answered. I told her I had a question about our event account and needed an itemized statement for all charges assigned to our contract. She said she could send one because I was listed as the primary payer in contact. I asked specifically about the prior family account adjustment. She became careful. She said she couldn't discuss private details of another client's old contract, but she could explain charges attached to my event account. I said that was all I wanted. She told me the adjustment was not generated by our current wedding services. It had been incorporated into the consolidated package at the request of a family contact during earlier negotiations. I asked, whose family account? She said the reference on the adjustment was tied to Leo. I thought I had heard her wrong.
Isabella's brother?
Yes, I sat down. Ms. Davies added that the amount was $27,600. I asked what it represented. She repeated that she couldn't give me someone else's contract history beyond what had been attached to my account, but she confirmed it was a remaining balance associated with a previously canceled event agreement. That was enough. Leo's broken engagement, same venue, same family, old contract. I thanked her and asked her to email the itemized statement and a written clarification of which charges were specific to our wedding and which were prior account adjustments now attached to our package. She did. I read it 3 times. Then I called Sam. Sam had been my best friend long enough to know when I was angry by the way I stopped using extra words. I told him what I had found. His first question was, "Do you have it in writing?" Yes. Then don't confront anyone until you understand the contract and the refund window. That was why I called him. My instinct was to walk into Margaret's house and put the statement on the table. Sam told me that if I did that too early, they would twist the argument into my tone, my jealousy, my bank move, anything except the invoice. So I kept digging, but only where I had a legitimate right to look. I reviewed the contract. The upgraded package could still be canceled within a short refund window, though a smaller deposit tied to our original reservation would remain non-refundable. I checked account access. I downloaded every wedding statement. I saved the venue email. I also saved a text Isabella had sent me after the card was frozen. At the time, I had barely noticed one line in it. She had written, "I was going to explain after the payment cleared, but you blew this up first." Explain what? I had asked her that in the moment. She never answered. Now I knew there had been something to explain. I called my younger sister Maya that night. I didn't tell her every number. I didn't want to turn this into family versus family. I told her Isabella had known at least something was being folded into the wedding package that didn't belong to us. Maya listened for a long time. Then she said, "Are you trying to decide if you can beat them at this, or if you still trust Isabella?" I said, "I'm not trying to beat anyone." "You've spent 2 years proving you're not bothered by Marcus," she continued. "I know, but you keep acting like if you stay calm enough, they'll eventually stop comparing you." I didn't answer. She continued, "Stop auditioning for a family that already cast you as the wallet. That's dramatic." "It is. I'm your sister. I get one." I laughed despite myself. Then she got serious. "Don't make a decision just to win the room. The question is not whether Marcus is better. The question is whether Isabella is honest." That resonated more than anything else anyone had said to me. 2 days later, I found the piece that made the tasting feel even worse. Isabella had left a printed wedding budget packet on the dining table. It was something she had made for a meeting Margaret wanted to have about getting everyone back on the same page. I wasn't going through her personal things. The packet was literally titled Wedding Budget Review and had our names at the top. I flipped through it because I wanted to see what numbers they planned to discuss. One page included a printed email chain that had been pasted beneath some vendor notes. Most of it was boring. Then I saw Marcus's name. Margaret had written to Isabella before the tasting. "You know, Ethan shuts down when he feels pushed. He only moves when he feels like he is being measured. Remind him what established actually looks like." Marcus always understood that part. Isabella had replied, "I know. I hate doing that." Margaret answered, "Then don't make it cruel. Just make the point. Once the package is locked, this all goes away." There was more below that, but not enough to explain every detail. It was enough to prove the comparison had been deliberate. The next evening, I asked Isabella to sit down with me. No parents, no Leo, no wedding documents in front of us. First, I asked one question. "How much did you know?" She looked at me. "About what?" "Leo's debt being inside our wedding package." Her face went pale. That told me more than her first answer. She said, "I didn't know it was all of it." I said nothing. "I didn't," she repeated. "Mom said she was consolidating some leftover family obligations because using the same venue gave us leverage. Did you know? Any of the money was not for our wedding." She looked away. "Ethan, did you know?" "Yes, but not the whole amount." I felt something in me drop, not explode. Drop, like a floor giving way quietly. "How much did you think it was?" "I don't know. A few things." "What things? Fees?" "Maybe some penalties from Leo's canceled event?" She nodded. "And you were going to let me pay for that?" She snapped. I was going to explain. After the payment cleared, she closed her eyes. I said, "You texted me that exact sentence. I was trying to protect everyone." "From what?" "From this. This is happening because you hid it." I didn't think of it as lying. I thought of it as solving it before it got ugly. It was already ugly. You just wanted me to pay before I could object. That is not fair. Then make it fair. Tell me what is. She stood up and started pacing. Leo screwed up. Mom and Dad helped him. The venue wouldn't just forget the balance. Mom said because we were booking the same place, there was a way to roll it together and negotiate the whole package down by putting his debt on our bill, by consolidating it. That's the same thing with a cleaner word. She looked furious and ashamed at the same time. I thought after the wedding it would all be ours anyway. That sentence stayed with me. I asked, "What does that mean?" "Our money." Our obligations, family stuff. So, because we were getting married, you decided it didn't matter whether I agreed before my money covered your brother's debt. I knew you would say no. That should have told you something. She sat down again, her voice dropped. I knew you would make it about boundaries. Yes, you always do. Because boundaries matter when people start moving money around without telling you. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I hate that I became my mother in this. I wanted that sentence to fix something. It didn't. The Marcus thing was planned too, I said. She went still. I placed the printed page on the table. She stared at it. Then she said, "You went through my stuff? It was in the wedding budget packet you left on our dining table. It has our names on it and was meant for the meeting about our budget." She had no answer to that. I said, "I wasn't competing with Marcus. I was trusting you." Her eyes filled completely then. "I know. No, I don't think you did. We sat there for a long time. Eventually." She said Margaret wanted us at her house the following evening because the next venue payment deadline was coming up. I almost refused. Then I decided I wanted everyone who had helped create the mess to hear the same facts at the same time. Not because I wanted a scene, but because I was done having separate conversations where each person could pretend they didn't know what the others had said. Before the meeting, I emailed Ms. Davies one final question. If we only canceled the upgraded package, could we preserve the base reservation while removing the prior family account adjustment? She replied that yes, subject to the contract terms. The upgrade package and consolidated adjustment could be removed before the deadline. We would lose part of a non-refundable deposit already paid, but most of the upgraded amount had not yet become locked. That meant I had a choice. At Margaret and Robert's house, everyone was already seated when I arrived. Isabella sat on one side of the dining table. Leo sat across from her. Margaret had a stack of printed wedding notes in front of her, though none of us needed it. Robert opened with, "We all care about each other. Let's try to keep this constructive." Margaret immediately ignored that. She looked at me and said, "The first thing that needs to happen is an apology to Isabella." "For what?" I asked. "For making her feel like a beggar in her own wedding." I glanced at Isabella. She looked down. Margaret continued, "You froze a card, moved money, and turned this into a public insult because of one comment." I said, "I'm willing to talk about how I handled the money. First, I want to understand the money itself." Margaret snapped, "There you go again." I put the itemized statement on the table. "What is this?" She barely looked at it. "The venue statement." "What is prior family account adjustment?" "Part of the package consolidation." "What was consolidated?" "Costs." "Whose costs?" She looked at Isabella, then at Robert. I waited. Finally, she said, "The venue has a long relationship with our family. They structured things in a way that made sense." I said Ms. Davies confirmed in writing that $27, $600 of the adjustment is connected to a prior canceled event account reference to Leo. Leo immediately said, "That old contract was not your business." The second the words left his mouth, he seemed to realize what he had done. I turned to him. I didn't say what old contract. He looked away. Margaret snapped, "Don't interrogate him." "I'm not," he just answered. Robert rubbed his forehead. Leo said, "It was an old contract. Mom said she had it handled." I asked, "Handled by putting it in my wedding bill?" "I didn't ask you personally, did I?" Leo mumbled. "No. That seems to be the problem." Margaret leaned forward. "You are acting as if somebody robbed you." "Nobody was trying to rob you," I said. "Then why did nobody tell me?" "Because every financial discussion with you becomes this rigid exercise in permission." "Yes," I agreed. "Permission is normally part of spending someone else's money." "You are almost family," Robert said. I turned to him. "Being family does not remove consent. This would have benefited everyone," he replied. "The venue was willing to work with us. Leo's issue gets resolved. You get your wedding, and there is no ugliness hanging over Isabella's family." I said, "So, the benefit to me was that I got to pay for the privilege of not knowing." "That is not what I said. It's what happened." Margaret pushed the invoice back toward me. "After the wedding, nobody remembers which line item paid for what." There it was again. This time, I understood it. I said, "You didn't need my money for flowers. You needed my silence for Leo." Margaret's expression hardened. "This is exactly the kind of humiliating performance I was afraid you would make." "I'm answering the meeting you called." She pointed toward Isabella. "Look what you are doing to her," I said. "I asked Isabella about this privately first." Isabella finally spoke. "Mom, stop." Margaret stared at her. Isabella's voice shook, but she continued. "I knew some of it," Robert said quietly. "Isabella." She looked at him. "No, he already knows." Margaret said, "You did not know the details." Isabella nodded. "I did not know the full amount." I asked, Did you know any of that money was not for our wedding? Isabella shut her eyes. Yes. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. I did not feel triumphant. That was the part one did not expect. I had imagined that once everyone stopped denying it, I would feel some kind of relief. Instead, I just felt tired. Then I took out the printed email page. Margaret's face changed as soon as she recognized it. I said, "This was also before the tasting." Isabella whispered, "Ethan, I read only the relevant part, not the whole email." I said, "You told Isabella to use Marcus because you thought I only moved when I felt measured against someone more established." Margaret said, "That was private correspondence. It was printed inside the wedding budget packet used for tonight's discussion. That does not give you the right to weaponize it." I almost laughed at the word weaponize. I said, "You used Isabella's ex to pressure me into approving a package that included Leo's debt. I am not the one who weaponized it." Leo muttered, "This is insane." I looked at him. "No, this is accounting, remember?" Margaret slammed her palm flat on the table. "You are turning family into accounting," I said. "A wedding budget is not a hiding place for your son's debt." Robert leaned back and said, "Family helps family." I nodded. "Yes. When they ask." He said, "You would have said no, probably. That does not make deception acceptable." He looked frustrated. "You are almost family. Sometimes you do things for family that you would not choose for yourself." I said, "Family does not hide a bill inside another man's wedding." That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to negotiate that night. I pulled out my phone. Isabella looked at me. "What are you doing?" "Canceling the upgrade package before the refund window closes." Margaret said, "You wouldn't dare." I looked at her. "It is my contract too." Isabella stood up. "Ethan, wait." I did. I looked at her, not at Margaret. "If you want me not to cancel it, tell me right now that you think we should pay your brother's $27,600 debt through our wedding bill." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I said, "That is the decision." She started crying. "I don't want that. I just don't want everything destroyed." It was already damaged before I saw the invoice. I emailed Ms. Davies the cancellation authorization we had discussed. No dramatic button, no shouting, just a written request to remove the upgraded package and the prior account adjustment from our event account. A minute later, I turned my phone face down on the table. Margaret looked furious. Leo looked sick. Robert looked older than he had when I walked in. Isabella looked like she had finally understood that this was not another planning fight. The consequences started quickly. We lost part of the deposit tied to changes we had already authorized. That hurt. It wasn't enough money to ruin me, but it was enough to make the decision feel real instead of symbolic. The venue removed the upgrade package and confirmed that the prior family adjustment was no longer attached to our wedding account. Leo now had to deal directly with whatever remained from his old contract. For the first time, Margaret could not call it a shared family problem because there was no wedding invoice left to hide it inside. She was furious with me for abandoning Leo. Isabella was furious with Leo for letting her become the person who had to lie for him. Leo kept insisting that he never personally asked me for anything, which somehow made him look worse every time he said it. Margaret was also removed from all financial planning. That part came from me and it was non-negotiable. I told Isabella that if the wedding ever moved forward, Margaret could have opinions about flowers, cake, or seating if Isabella wanted her involved. But she would have no access to vendor decisions, payment information, account details, or package negotiations. Robert said that was punitive. I said it was a boundary based on demonstrated behavior. He did not like the wording. I did not care anymore. Isabella and I paused the wedding a few days later, not canceled permanently. Paused. We stopped planning. We told the venue we would not proceed with new commitments. We accepted that some money was gone. I calculated exactly how much Isabella had contributed to the wedding fund and returned the unspent portion to her. She looked at the transfer and said, "You really separated everything." I said, "I don't want there to be any question about whose money I kept." She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where we had argued about the invoice. "I'm sorry," she said. I had heard versions of that before, but this one was quieter. She said, "I knew it was wrong. I just kept telling myself Mom had a plan, and that once it was paid, nobody would have to deal with it anymore." I asked, "Including me?" She nodded, "Especially you." That hurt, but I appreciated that she finally said it plainly. She wiped her face and said, "You made me look like I was stealing from you." I did not answer right away. Then I said, "I can forgive embarrassment. I do not know how to marry a setup." She flinched. I wasn't trying to set you up. You helped create a situation where I was supposed to pay before I knew what I was paying for. I know. And you used Marcus to make me feel small enough to say yes. I know. I had never heard her say it that directly, she said. I hate that I did that. I believed her. Believing that she regretted it was not the same as trusting her again. That difference became the center of everything. For the next few weeks, we stayed together, but not normally. There was no wedding planning. No pretending the problem had been solved because the bad charge was gone. Isabella started having separate conversations with her family without me. I did not tell her what to say, but I told her what I needed to see if she wanted me to consider marriage again. First, she had to tell her parents clearly that she had been wrong to help hide Leo's debt inside our wedding budget. Not we made mistakes. Not things got out of hand. Her part. Second, she had to apologize to me directly for using Marcus as pressure without blaming Margaret for making her do it. Third, if we ever started planning again, we would go to premarital counseling first, including serious discussions about money, family obligations, access, and what happened when one of us said no. She did not like the conditions. She also did not call them unfair. Margaret reacted exactly as I expected. According to Isabella, she said I was trying to isolate her from her family. Isabella told her, "No, Ethan is asking me to stop lying for you." That conversation ended badly. Robert later called me and said, the family had been trying to solve an old problem quietly. I told him quiet was not the same as honest. He said, "You could have handled it with more grace." I said, maybe. That was one point I did not argue. I still think there is a fair debate about the bank move. I moved my money before I told Isabella. At the time, I did it because I had just been publicly humiliated, and I no longer trusted that the account would be used within the limits we had agreed on. In hindsight, I could have gone home and told her I was changing the account before I did it. Maybe that would have been healthier. But knowing what I learned afterward, I also know that if I had waited through the weekend, the upgrade payment might have cleared. I do not lose sleep over protecting the money. I do regret that our relationship reached a point where protecting myself required bank controls at all. Isabella returned the limited wedding card about a month. After we paused the wedding, she placed it on the kitchen counter and said, "I don't want this." I looked at it. The old one had been our magic card. This one had never been used for anything meaningful. It had become a symbol of distrust almost immediately. I put it in a drawer. A few days later, after Isabella left to meet her brother, I took it back out. I cut it in half. Not because I hated her. Not because I was ending everything that second. I cut it because I did not want to carry a version of marriage that needed locked limits and silent safeguards just to function. If we ever got married, I wanted us to be able to share access because we had earned trust. Not because one person was afraid to say no and the other was afraid to be used. We are still paused. Isabella has apologized without bringing Marcus, Margaret, or Leo into the sentence. She has also admitted to her parents that she knew part of the debt was being folded into the wedding package and that she went along with it. Leo is dealing with the venue himself now. Margaret is no longer part of any financial decision involving me. Robert still thinks I made a private family problem much bigger than it needed to be. Maybe from his perspective I did, but I also lost money. I lost a wedding date we had spent months building toward. I lost the easy version of trust one had with Isabella. And I lost the belief that being calm long enough would eventually earn respect from people who had decided my role was to prove myself financially. The strangest part is that Marcus barely matters to me now. He never did anything to me. He bought a house. He posted about it. That was it. The person who hurt me was Isabella, because she knew I was not competing with him and chose to turn him into a tool anyway. For years, I thought the mature thing was to keep ignoring the comparisons. I thought if I stayed steady, if I did not react, if I kept showing up, eventually everyone would understand that I did not need to be Marcus. I was wrong about one part of that. I did not need them to understand it. I needed to stop participating in a contest I never agreed to enter. So, the wedding is still on hold. If Isabella and I rebuild this, it will be because she can stand beside me when her family is unhappy with us, not because I can outspend a man she dated years ago. And if we cannot rebuild it, then losing deposits and plans will still be cheaper than starting a marriage where honesty only arrives after the payment clears.